Well, welcome to another edition of AP's Profiles in Christian Living. My name is Mark Powell, and my special guest with me today is Reverend Dr. Paul Cooper. Welcome, Paul.
Thanks, Mark.
Now, you really need no introduction because most people in the church know you, but I have a list here. This is going to sound, unfortunately, like a eulogy, okay? But let me just run through some of the highlights of your ministry because, you know, you've been around a long time and you've done a lot. Right. Here's just some of the things. Not only do you have a bachelor's degree in science in geology, also an honours degree in a Bachelor of Divinity, Masters of Theology, and a PhD in Church History, Doctor of Philosophy, right? Numerous publications. You've been the convener of TEC, Theological Education, Presbyterian Aged Care, Trustee of the Church, Social Sciences Committee convener, ad hoc committees for Korean ministry, eldership, Scots College Council, Historical Records and Committee. That must have been exciting.
It was.
Sorry, I shouldn't just be disparaging there. Ministry and Mission Committee, member of the Media Committee. The list goes on, as well as numerous committees on the GAOA. You've been an elder as well as a minister. You've been a theological lecturer. And I've noticed here, most important of all, you're married to Megan and you have 4 children.
Indeed. Most importantly, none of that would I have been able to do without Megan's continual support and sacrifice. She's been a great blessing.
So let me just ask you on this. Philip Jensen said many years ago, I'll never forget, he said, be careful who you marry because you'll either double your ministry or halve it. What's your response to that statement?
Well, in my case, I think she quadrupled it rather than doubled it. Certainly true. I think that a wife in ministry is an enormous support and blessing, and the other side of the coin is true as well, unfortunately.
So I've never asked you this, and I hope not to embarrass your wife, but what do you reckon it is about your wife that has been such a blessing to you and your ministry?
She's more godly than I am, to start with. She's very sacrificial in what she does. We have a joke about my PhD in the family, and the joke is that Dad has the P and Mum has the HD, which is true as well. She's very gifted in her own right, very precise in what she does and very careful, very creative person, and she loves me.
Yeah. Now, you've done it all, right? You've been involved in every committee. I mean, you've also seen the church through one of the most tumultuous times, the seismic shift that was church union, right? What do you see as the difference between the church you grew up in, because you were a member of Burwood Presbyterian Church.
Yes.
Right? What is it like from when you were a boy to now?
Well, when I was a boy growing up in the church, I don't think I heard the gospel. If I did hear it, I certainly didn't respond to it. I don't think there was a clear call about the grace of God, a clear call of the gospel. I think the Bible wasn't treated with the respect that it deserves to be treated with. I think that's the main difference to me, is the position of the Bible in the Presbyterian Church after union, gradually growing in commitment that makes all the difference.
Now, I'm going to make you feel really old now because I was saying to you before we started recording that I remember so many of the things that you used to say to me when you taught me as a young whippersnapper going through the Presbyterian College here in Sydney. I call these Cooperisms, by the way. And one of the things you often would say is in your day there were more people at church, but there were less Christians. Is that still a good summary, do you think?
Certainly there were more people, I think. Yes, I think that's still true. I think that reflecting on my own background, our family expressed cultural Christianity, cultural Presbyterianism that I grew up. I mean, I grew up in the church, went to Sunday school, PFA, etc. My parents had my brother and I baptised, and they took the view that seeing they'd taken on that responsibility, they should go to church as well, so they did. My father became an elder in the church. And so I was a product of cultural Christianity till I went to university, and then when I was at university there was all this challenge about my inherited Christian values. Would I keep them? Would I get rid of them? I had to think about that. And the other thing was that Vietnam was in the air. My number would go in the barrel, and there's nothing like a whiff of death to make you think clearly about the future. And so I had to rethink where I stood with respect to this thing called Christianity that I culturally accepted.
So was it at uni that you became a Christian?
It was. In my second year at university, I was in a geology class, and a fellow came and sat next to me. His name was John Woodhouse, and we got chatting and became friends, and he invited me off to Bible study. I went to a Bible study with John Chapman, doing Romans, blew me out of the water completely, and it's really the beginning of the process really there. And I eventually went forward to Billy Graham Crusade in 1969, I think it was, but I'd made the decision before then.
Wow. So here you are going through college, or university I should say, and you've got John Woodhouse on one side, John Chapman on the other. I mean, us Presbyterians would go, it's all predestined, Paul.
Indeed. No argument from me there.
Yeah. Now, you've had particular personal challenges of late.
Mm-hmm.
You've been diagnosed with Parkinson's.
Yep.
Which meant that you've had to give up pastoral ministry, and yet you've been more active than ever in writing. Can you just talk us through, if it's okay, what has that meant for you and your own identity, having to give up that ministerial role of being a pastor?
Well, I think it's shown me some important lessons, that my identity is not defined by my work as a pastor. As someone who's been very heavily involved in various aspects of the Presbyterian Church, as you've said, and not too much I haven't had a involvement in, finger in most pies.
Absolutely. Is there a pie you haven't had a finger in? That's my question.
Possibly not. And you are taught very quickly with Parkinson's that who you are needs to change because you can't cope like you used to be able to cope. And I came to the conclusion that I'm not defined by that role of ministry, so I resigned from my parish and looked for other opportunities for ministry, principally in pursuit of history. I serve as the secretary of the Evangelical History Association to try to organise academics to write history,
which is
publish
excellent.
it.
Yeah, that's a much neglected area in Australia, isn't it? The history of evangelicalism, yes. And its impact.
Yes, it is indeed. And also in book publishing, helping people publish their books. Christian people publish their books to self-publish. One of the big impacts of having Parkinson's is, as we say in our household, Dad doesn't have Parkinson's, we have Parkinson's. So my wife bears a fair burden as a result of this. Being woken up at 3 a.m. most mornings is a bit of a problem. So there are changes that need to take place, but I'm enjoying it. I always have taken the point of view to enjoy what I'm doing at the time. When I stop enjoying it, I stop doing it. So I hope I'm being useful, and so that's principally what I've learned.
So let's drill down on a couple of these more recent publications, right?
Yes.
Because, in some ways, these are pretty significant. First of all, one of your publications, Burning or Bushed,
yes.
You've been involved in, really a history of the Presbyterian Church. Paul, are we burning or are we bushed as a denomination?
Yes, yeah. Well, it's a book about 40 years since church union. My view is that we are burning rather than bushed. I don't think we're bushed. At the time of church union, it was widely predicted that we wouldn't last 10 years.
Really?
But that's proved to be wrong. God, I don't think, is finished with the Presbyterian Church. Clearly isn't. And it has a valuable contribution to make to Christian ministry within Australia. So I'm very positive about it. Of course, we've got problems, like everybody has problems. We're not perfect.
Come on, let's be controversial. What are our problems, Paul? You're the elder statesman. You can say this. There's an old saying in the country, right? You can come in as a blow-in, right? You can blow in, blow up, and blow out. Now, I'm not necessarily saying blow up, but as really, you are an elder statesman in the church. You've been around a long time, right? What do you think are our most significant challenges as a church?
Well, the significant challenges are the same as they've always been, to be faithful in the circumstances in which you find yourself. I'm very aware that the trouble with being an elder statesman is that things change. And when I went out into ministry in 1977 to a small country community, even though I was very young, I was a respected member of that community because I was the minister. And I was the Presbyterian minister, what's more.
Yeah.
More respected, more respectable. That's not true of anyone who exits to that same parish today, I'm sure.
Yeah.
So the attitudes in the community have changed greatly towards ministers and towards ministry, towards Christianity. We've gone from being something which is part of our cultural heritage, it's good for the kids, we'll send them along to Sunday school, to, well, isn't this Christian faith really unhelpful, evil even? So, I mean, I think it's much tougher in ministry today, so reflections of elder statesmen need to be made with great care. Context has changed.
Yeah, very wise, I think. There's different challenges, isn't there, in every generation, as in terms of what it means to be faithful.
Yeah.
Another book you've written is on the Declaratory Statement.
Edited.
Well, okay, sorry, edited. Sorry. It's just that I see you at the GA of A, flogging this book, right? And I'm thinking, oh, you must have wrote it. But you're just very passionate about it. Why be passionate about the Declaratory Statement, Paul? Why do we need a book on that?
Every church needs clarity with respect to what it believes. Otherwise, you spend your time arguing about things that you shouldn't be arguing about. You need to have clarity as to where you stand doctrinally, and the Declaratory Statement is part of the process of stating where we stand doctrinally on major issues in terms of our theology. And so it's really important for office bearers, ministers and elders who actually take a vow to uphold our Presbyterian standards that they understand them. How can you vow to uphold your standards if you don't understand them?
Okay. So can I just push back a little bit on this, right? Not that I'm going to challenge you here. I just, for clarity's sake, right? I've heard in my 20-odd years of being a minister, the Declaratory Statement used to justify everything from not believing in the Lord's Day, to the role of the Lord, to creationism, to even infant baptism. What does the Declaratory Statement actually cover?
Well, that's why you write a book and you organise for other people to contribute to a book in numerous chapters to address some of these issues.
Give us the book in a nutshell.
The book in a nutshell? Can't do that. I would say that, like every issue of interpretation, you need to understand the background and the history of the document which gave rise to it. You cannot read it just without a context. Part of what Read in the Light, the book, does is to give context, which helps understanding, which then disqualifies some views as to what it does and does not do.
Now you've got me intrigued. Okay, Mr. Historian, what is the context?
Well, the context stretches back over the 19th century, starting principally in Victoria with their declaratory statements that they had, responding to the ministry of Charles Strong, who basically took the point of view that you could treat the Bible as like an oyster shell, of which hidden somewhere in there was a pearl. So you just throw away the oyster shell and just take out the pearl. So you can get rid of a lot of the Bible and what it teaches. You just need the essence.
Just keep the golden rule.
Yeah, something like that. So from that, the Victorian Church responded with a declaratory statement indicating that you can't do that sort of thing to the Presbyterian Church's standards.
Interesting.
And it continues on from there, I think.
So it's really a response to liberalism.
It is a response to liberalism. It's a response, in my view, to a misunderstanding of the Westminster Confession. It is in response to giving a degree of freedom with respect to how one holds to the Westminster Confession, that's true, but largely it's a document which is directed towards holding the truths of the confession.
Okay.
But read the book, Mark.
Yeah, but it's ironic, isn't it? I mean, the Church of Australia put that in there, and yet liberalism swept through us as a denomination, didn't it? It white-handed us theologically.
Well, documents don't preserve your theological integrity. Action does. And an unwillingness to enforce your standards, an unwillingness to discipline, an unwillingness to require people to hold their ordination vows is the reason why, in the end, didn't preserve the church from much declension. But it was there as part of our constitution, so that when church union happened in 1977, we could look back and say, this is a constitutional document. This defines what we should be, not what we've become.
It was very helpful in that regard.
Very helpful. That's what doctrinal statements are meant to do. But you've got to use them.
Okay. Let me change track a bit now, because I know another work that you put a lot of effort into is, I guess you'd call it a biography on Goodlatte, one of the great benefactors here in New South Wales. I was a member at Ashfield Presbyterian Church, really just down the road from where we're sitting. But also, I was at PLC Pinball a little while ago for one of my children's sporting matches, and I saw Goodlatte Hall.
Goodlatte House, I think.
Goodlatte House. Yeah. Sorry, you're right. This man was everywhere. I take it he was one of the wealthiest men in Australia at the time. Can you tell us a little bit about him?
John Goodlatte, really the story is about John Goodlatte and his wife Anne, and they are both really, really important. And one of the things I found out whilst doing the study was the importance of Anne.
So it's another Megan, you could say.
Yeah, very much so. I think it's fairly typical that the wives don't get much of a run, and certainly she hadn't got much of a run historically. Well, Goodlatte hadn't either, but hers was less of a run than his. He came to Australia from Scotland in the 1850s. He came to Sydney and set up a Bunnings of the day, as it were. And frankly, he made a fortune in the building boom. He was a devout Presbyterian, very benevolently minded, and as was Anne. And so they decided, they didn't have any children, and they decided that with their wealth they would give it away, not waiting for the end of their lives to give it away. They give it away progressively. But more than that, they gave their lives to lots and lots of different benevolent activities. They didn't just simply write a cheque. They got involved as secretary or as president and were
assiduous. So what were some of those, Paul?
Oh, well, in terms of the Presbyterian Church, Presbyterian Ladies College, Sydney. The reason why Goodlatte House is at Pymble is because Goodlatte negotiated to buy the land of Pymble Ladies College, which was Presbyterian Ladies College.
That property is massive.
But he virtually had nothing to do with that particular school. It was PLC Sydney where it was.
Oh, right.
Which is where it all started from.
Right. PLC Sydney was the
Yep.
first,
Yep.
and then it went out from there.
Yes, yes.
Which makes sense because he was worshipping down the road.
Yeah, that's right. He was a founder of the Sydney City Mission.
Oh, was he?
He was very early on a member of the AMP and twice chairman of AMP. He was very much involved in the Deaf, Dumb and Blind Institute, or the Royal Institute for Deaf and Blind Children, as it's called nowadays. He was, with his wife, really involved in the Sydney Female Refuge, which was an organisation for rescuing prostitutes and providing with them some shelter and help and assistance. And there weren't many philanthropic pies that he didn't have his fingers in, or she wasn't involved in across Sydney. They were motivated principally by their Christian faith, but they were doers, not writers, and therefore they don't leave too many written records, but they leave a great legacy of activity.
So I want to ask you about that. What do you think are the lessons for us today? Because I'm sure there's a lot of people listening to this right now thinking, I'm exactly that. I'm not a writer, I'm not a speaker, but they're doers. And the Lord has blessed them with wealth. What lessons can we learn about philanthropic giving wisely while we're still alive?
Well, I'm always careful about drawing lessons from history because context is important. If you go back to the 19th century, the government wasn't actively involved a great deal in providing for the needs of society, and therefore Christians formed all these particular societal groups to handle particular problems.
Interesting.
So Christians were very much involved in a lot of these welfare type activities. Progressively, as of course history has gone, they've been taken over by government services, and therefore that context has changed significantly. So I think in the 19th century they had a very clear understanding of the relationship of the gospel of grace with the need to be involved in giving mercy, and that they didn't polarise on those issues, that it was either one or the other, it was both and you find that constantly in their ministries. They're keen to communicate the gospel of the life, death and resurrection of Christ, but they're also keen to give assistance. They basically got involved. That was what they did, how they did it. They just rolled up their sleeves, saw a need and tried to meet it. More difficult nowadays because so many of our needs are covered by various organisations, various government. You know, we have pensions and things they didn't have in those days, allowances. But there are still needs, and I think one of the lessons is that the Christian church should be looking for those at the absolute margins that are neglected by the system, if I can put it that way. It was one of the reasons why the Presbyterian Church got involved in the Alloa Children's Home, or Children's Hospital. It's not a home. Children's Hospital. It was because here was a group that was basically not being given the attention that they deserved. And the thing about Christian ministry is when it's successful, what happens is that over time the church is no longer needed to be there, so that we move on to something else. So a lot of these organisations in the past were Christian, have lost their Christian ethos over time. I think that's something you need to watch very carefully.
Yeah.
So
one final question, if I can switch tracks, because you know in this latter season, I won't say your last, but in this latter season, current season, you've been very much into publishing and writing. You also oversee IDA Books. You're very passionate about history. For the people, young people, middle-aged people, out there, older people, who want to write, who even think they've got a book in them, what guidance, encouragement would you give them?
In order to write, you need to write. Start. That's my advice. And commit it to paper.
Yeah.
And it is only in the act of writing that you actually create your book. You can think about it till the cows come home, but you need to write and get something down, and then you can begin to work on it.
Okay, so I'm going to give you a plug here. As the person that oversees IDA Books, are you looking for new authors? Like, if people are to contact you and say, hey, Paul, I've got an idea, can you provide mentoring and help?
Well, we certainly have with various authors who would submit work to us and say, can you help us with this, or what do you think of this, give us an opinion. Can you make some suggestions? We certainly have done that. Sometimes that produces the book. And I mean, basically the whole role of IDA Books is to help people self-publish.
Yeah.
We're not a publisher in a traditional sense where we pay for a book and bear the financial burden of it and then promote it and distribute it. No, we help an author publish their own book and provide the services that are needed.
And then it's up to them to market it.
Up to them to market it, and they do that quite well, I think, and we've had a number of quite successful books, I think, in recent times.
Great.
Who knows how long this will go on for, but we'll just keep publishing when we need to.
All right, I'm going to last question, very last question. What final words? If you could be remembered for saying one thing to the church, you had that opportunity to speak to the whole church about an exhortation, and encouragement, what would you say?
My goodness, a question without notice.
That's right. Sorry, we're not in assembly.
What would I say if I wanted to be remembered for one thing?
No, not if you wanted to be remembered. What we need to hear.
Oh, what we need to hear. Well, that's much more important than what I would be remembered for. We need to hear that God is faithful, that God loves us, that God sent his Son into the world to die on the cross, to be raised on the third day for our justification. And we need to put our faith and trust not in our own works, but in his. That's
Amen.
what we need to hear. And we need to respond to that constantly each day.
Amen. Well, thank you very much, Paul.
Thank you.
We'll give the COVID way. Thank you very much for being with us. It's been great.
Great to share. Can we do it again?
I hope so. We'll get you back. It'll be really good. Well, this has been Mark Powell with Reverend Dr. Paul Cooper. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of AP's Profiles in Christian Living. I hope to see you next time, and hopefully we'll have Paul again next time and in the future, and we'll do it again. Thanks very much.